What's up, Schmoozers? Welcome back to this week's episode of Schmoozing Time. For those of you who are new here, I am David Cobby, and I am on a mission to share the stories about personal brands of many proud Jews. Make sure to stay locked into this week's episode because it's going to be an extremely valuable one. I have no idea why this week's guest has not been selected to the Marketing Hall of Fame yet, because she's got a resume in branding alone that blows her competition out of the water. To give you a quick overview of her accomplishments, she has built a 7-figure business from the ground up, has a top 2% podcast where she's hosted hundreds of world-famous entrepreneurs, and has partnered with world-renowned brands such as Target and Unilever. She has also done an amazing job advocating for the Jewish people in Israel and has a handful of viral social media posts. Please welcome to the show the woman making marketing simple as can be, Lindsay Pinchuk. Lindsay, how is your day going today?
It is great. And thank you so much, David. That was the nicest introduction. I so appreciate it. Really.
Of course. Well, I'm so excited to talk to you. And, you know, you got the marketing brain. I got the marketing brain. Like, I was a marketing major in school. Like, we could talk all things marketing. And I know a big thing about, you know, your brand, which we'll obviously go into, is you talk about this idea of community, right? Jewish communities are invaluable. I think we both know that. I mean, I know you grew up in Detroit, and you obviously have a very strong connection to your Jewish community. So I want you to kick this off by talking about your Jewish community growing up and how that kind of impacted you as a Jewish person. So why don't you go ahead and share a little bit about your Jewish background, where you grew up. I know I already mentioned you're from Detroit. And kind of talk about your Jewish upbringing and how your Jewish community impacted you as a person.
Yeah, so I grew up in West Bloomfield, Michigan, and I'm a very proud Detroiter, even though I live in Chicago now. I grew up in a family that wasn't very religious, but we were very much traditional Jews. We celebrated all the holidays. My family joined a temple. We were founding members of Temple Shir Shalom, and I always joke that my bat mitzvah was actually in like an office complex because our temple wasn't built yet. And so, and you know, and I always use that as an example to my kids is like, it doesn't matter where you are. It just matters like who's around you and that, you know, you have the Torah there, you know, it doesn't really matter. I was bat mitzvahed in an office. I worked at a Jewish overnight camp, and my kids actually go to that camp, and it's where I met my husband. And I went on the March of the Living when I was a senior in high school. I made the decision to not go on senior year spring break to Cancun with my friends. And I went on a 2-week trip and went on the March of the Living with many of my very close friends, but it was actually after spring break. So like some of them went on spring break and then March of the Living, my parents made me choose, and I chose March of the Living. And it was by far one of the most pivotal experiences of my life. And it really set the foundation for how I feel as a Jewish person. I was also on this trip with members of my immediate Detroit Jewish community that were Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox. And it really opened the door to understanding just the differences within our own religion and also respecting the differences within our own religion. But that trip was really kind of, you know, I'd always been very interested in the Holocaust, and that's why I wanted to go on this trip. I felt the need to bear witness. And it was on that trip with two of my best friends were with me on that trip, where I made this promise of, you know, never again. And it is something that I have kept. And that is part of why I am a proud Jew. And, you know, when you talk about community, you know, community has so many different levels and layers. And I think you and I probably both know that it's like wherever you go, there's always someone Jewish. There's actually a song about that. And that the Jewish community is all connected. And you can get to really anyone within the Jewish community less than 6 degrees for sure. And that's something that I realized very early on growing up in Detroit. Just, you know, I went to camp and I grew up, you know, going to West Bloomfield High School, but I had friends that went to Andover and North Farmington, and, you know, everyone was connected. And it was something that I realized very early on. And it's something that I've tried to convey to my kids. And it's been hard to kind of convey that to my kids. And I bring this up because just this summer, my now turning 14-year-old tomorrow, she says to me, she came home for like visiting weekend, and she was like, Mom, we were sitting at this campfire and so-and-so knew grandma's best friend, and then someone else knew, you from growing up. Like they said their mom knew you from growing up. And she like rattled off like 6 different things because she goes to camp in Michigan. And then she stopped and she looked at me and she goes, we are all connected, aren't we? And I was like, yes, I was like, you finally get it. Like, because they just never got it that we would be out and about and I'd run into people and be like, this person was, my camp friend's sister or whatever it might be. And so that community, though, has really always played into the foundation of even my business, because when I start anything in business, I go to my community first. And I've always, my entire life, made it a point to network and meet people and ask for introductions to new people. And I always just have had the mentality of the more the merrier, and you can never know too many people. And it's important to have a position in your community. And the Jewish community is like none other. It is the most supportive community out there. Another quick story about community is that we were in the car one time with my daughter. My daughter has many friends who aren't Jewish, with one of her non-Jewish friends. And the kid said to my daughter, oh, I saw you snapped with so-and-so. You posted a picture with so-and-so. How do you know that person? And I turned around and looked at her and I said, we all know each other. I was like, I mean, it's someone who like lives, down the road. And I was like, don't be surprised. I was like, every Jewish person knows each other. And I was just kidding. And I said that to her, but I said, part of the Jewish community is like, we're very connected. And that's how Jordan knows that. My daughter knows that person. Mm-hmm.
So I think it's so funny to hear this story over and over again. Like the Jewish community really, and I preach that on my podcast a lot, is it's so connected. And I think especially this is underrated. And I think both you and I can relate to this, is the Midwest Jews, right? We have smaller Jewish communities. Like I'm from Minnesota, right? And, going back to your example of the bat mitzvah in an office, like the synagogue that I went to growing up for the first like 8-9 years of my life was in the basement of a church, right? So it's like, there's just like little things about the Jewish communities in the Midwest, like aside from Chicago, I guess, but like you have to sacrifice so much because there's so little demand for like a strong Jewish community there. But I think it's just so funny that, when people ask me like, oh, do you know so-and-so from Minnesota? They're Jewish. And I tell people like genuinely, like 99% of the time, like I know them. And actually, this is an even crazier story going into this, is this summer when I was in Rome, I was in a hostel with people and, I was like in another room and I walk out of the room and another, like hostels, you're with random people. And another guy joins my room and, we start talking. And then he's like, he sees like I had a Minnesota Vikings hat with me. And he's like, oh, are you a Vikings fan? I'm like, yeah. Are you a Vikings fan? And he's like, yeah. Start hitting it off. Turns out this kid was roommates with my next door neighbor in college at Tulane. Like, it's just like stuff like this happens all the time.
All the time. You can't make it up.
Even when it's across the world, which is just like the craziest thing. And also the Kotel too. I don't know if you have the same thing, but every time I go to the Kotel, I run into somebody I know. It's like the craziest thing. I don't know. Has that ever happened to you?
No, but I haven't been to Israel since I was 18. So,
okay.
So I haven't been as an adult. So.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. I mean, well, hopefully you'll go back and you'll.
No, I plan to go back. I had planned to go in the spring and the trip got canceled. So.
That's so unfortunate. But, hopefully like you'll, anyway, kind of tying this all together, like basically Jewish communities, right? Like it's just, they're so intertwined and they're so interconnected. I know your early career before you were a CEO, as I was doing a deep dive into your LinkedIn, I saw that you had jobs at Sports Illustrated and MTV. And those jobs, right? Like those are like cool jobs. You don't just like get those, right? We talk about connections and community and making sure you network and meet with people, which is a big reason why I'm doing this podcast, is like proof in the pudding. 22-year-old David Cobby, who lives in Baltimore, who works a full-time job, can reach out to anybody who's Jewish and has a personal brand to connect with them. You had to some degree, network and connect with people in those companies to get the job. So talk about your experience with Sports Illustrated and MTV and how you ended up in those jobs. I think that's so cool.
This is a great question, and it's a really good story. So when I was graduating from college, I was recruited by Leo Burnett, which is a huge advertising agency based here in Chicago. I was like their one hire from the University of Michigan that year. And our jobs all got rescinded and pushed back because they were actually supposed to start on September 10th, 2001. We would have lost our jobs had we started. But, and then 9/11 happened and the economy went even more in the toilet. And I knew that I had to find something else. And I was a sports management major, which is a very weird major. I mean, it was very weird at the time to have that as a major. Also, as a girl, I was looking on job boards and I was on the Time Inc. job board, and there was a sales assistant position at Sports Illustrated for kids. And I always wanted to be a journalist. I never thought that like the business side would be, I didn't even know that like ad sales existed. And I also certainly did not know that it was the more lucrative job to have in a magazine. And so I saw that there was this job opening and I applied through the website, but we all know that goes nowhere. And so I went to Barnes & Noble and I grabbed the magazine and I looked in the masthead of the magazine, which is where all the staff is listed. And I called the office in Chicago. And I left the woman a message. She's actually a very close friend of mine to this day. I left her a message and I said, I saw there's a job opening. I would really like to interview for it. I'm a sports management major. I would love to work at Time Inc. And she called me back and she said, we're really close to making a hire. And I said, can I at least come in for an interview? And I said, please, can I come in for an interview? And, the economy was shit at that time. And so it was like, you had to be really ballsy. And I think you still do. And I went in and I had the interview. And like 5 days later, they asked me to go to lunch. It was right before the holidays. And they made me a job offer. And she said, like, you knocked it out of the park. You blew us away. There was no question. And so I started that job and I became very close with both of my bosses. And then there were other people on the floor at Fortune magazine and Money magazine and Time magazine. And it was a very tight-knit community, and I still talk to many of those people. I only worked there for a year because I really went into sales, and they pushed me to go into sales. They helped me get my job at the Tribune, which was my first sales job, was at the Chicago Tribune. And it was through all of these experiences that anytime I wanted to interview for a new job, I asked my network, like, who has job openings? Do you know of anyone who has openings? I actually got to a point, especially with MTV, I had interviewed for a job at MTV that I didn't get. And then I got the job at Redbook. I worked at Redbook, and then like MTV called me back. Like they were like a year and a half, 2 years later, they were like, we really should have hired you. We wanted to hire you. And so it's not just your network, but it's also go for the interview, meet the people. Like even if you think that it's not going to be a fit for you, it never hurts to interview for a job. You never know where it could lead. And I do think that in terms of hiring and jobs, people hire people that they know, that they have had experience with. They'll think about people when they're hiring, like, oh, I know this person, or I interviewed this person, or I know so-and-so talks about this person. You want to be mentioned in rooms where you're not present in like the best way possible. So you have to put yourself out there and you have to be assertive.
So good, guys. This is some advice that people really don't tell you. And I think we might have a little bit of a tendency to be a little pushy, or some of us might be a little bit too reserved. But just going back to like how you got the interview at Sports Illustrated, like that's amazing. You literally took the magazine, called up the person, and they gave you an interview.
Well, you cannot wait. Like if you wait for someone to reach out to you, you're putting your fate in someone else's hands. Like you need to make the decision. If you want something, you need to manifest it and make it happen for yourself. Similarly, any interview, and I always tell anyone that I mentor this who's going for an interview, if you want the job, ask for it. And that was advice that my dad gave me, especially in a sales capacity. Like I wanted this job, and my very last thing that I said in any of the interviews was, do you have any other questions for me? Do you have any hesitations? Is there anything else that I can address? And if they said no, I said, well, then I want you to know I really want this job. Can I have this job? And I know you can't give me an answer now, but I want you to know that that's how much I want it. And, it's really, people want to hire assertive people. They don't want to hire pushovers. They want to hire people that they know will get the job done. If you show that in the interview, you're more likely to get hired.
Right. I think there is kind of a struggle though, and maybe you can push back on this, but I think there is kind of a struggle with people being too assertive, too cocky. And, when you're in a job interview, there's definitely some sort of like power structure, right? Especially if you're interviewing for a corporate job, they expect you to show up in a suit, like to literally kiss people's asses, like all that stuff. Like I understand that. And that's just part of the culture of corporate America and a lot of companies. So I guess for you, how do you walk the line of not being cocky, right? Especially somebody like you now that's done so many amazing things. How do you walk the line of not being cocky, but then also being assertive? Talk to me a little bit about that.
So assertive is very different than like overconfident, right?
Sure.
Like you can be assertive and without being pushy too. I mean, I think it's really important that if you want something, not to hold back. And that's not just with the job. I mean, if you want to have coffee with someone or interview someone or be friends with someone, put yourself out there, and I think like that's not being necessarily overconfident and cocky. I think if you go into an interview with a chip on your shoulder, like you've done everything and you're the best and no one else can do this, like you don't want that. And like even with everything I have accomplished, I don't go into any meeting like that. I mean, I can always learn, I can always grow. And I have that mentality. And so I think when you're in an interview, you definitely, if you want the job, I think that it's more of, can I help you get to this decision where I'm the right person versus I am the right person. You better hire me because you're going to regret it if you don't. Those are two different mindsets and attitudes.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's a big issue that, people, at least my age too, right? Like I'm fresh out of college and, kind of similar to you, like the job market now was horrible. Like I got very lucky that I got a return offer from my company, but I just like it's terrible when the just job market is bad, and obviously post COVID it's been a mess. And I think problem solving, right, is a big skill that you need to convey in an interview. And I think with you as somebody that has the entrepreneur mind, problem solving is definitely the center of entrepreneurship. And you kind of, how your career trajectory went, and you can kind of correct me if I'm wrong, but you were kind of in, let's say, call it the corporate-ish world for a number of years.
Almost 10.
Almost 10 years. Okay. So you were in the corporate world for almost 10 years, which is like a decent amount of time. That's a long time. But then all of a sudden you decide to start your own business. So I want you to tell me that story of you're leaving the security of the corporate world, starting your own business. And it was a business that's not super typical for, and it only caters to women, right? It was only catered to pregnant women. Tell me about that and why you decided to like move forward with your career, but going down the entrepreneurial path.
So I didn't do this on purpose. I more so did it to serve a need for myself first. And so I got pregnant. Actually, I started thinking about this before I got pregnant. We live in Chicago. My family, my husband's family, no one's here. We don't have family here. And I had said to my husband, like, what is going to happen when I get pregnant? What if no one is pregnant? And like, I have no friends who are going to like be there. Like, and he's like, well, there has to be some kind of like groups or this. And there wasn't. There really was like no community for expectant moms, at least here at the time. And so I started kind of thinking about this, knowing that we were going to start trying to have a family. And luckily, I did get pregnant very quickly. And I was like, I'm going to just like start this like for my own self. And we're going to host some events and hopefully pregnant women will come. You were like not even born. I mean, like, I'm kidding. You were like less than 10 when I started this. Right. And there was no social media. And so you have to put like, think about what that looked like. Like there was no social media. So I started hosting these events just to meet other pregnant women. And I did a prenatal workout. I did a shopping event. And then people were like, what's next? What's next? Like, will you bring in speakers? And so I just started organizing these get-togethers, but they were like 50, 75, 100 people. Like they were starting to get pretty big. And then I started having brands reach out to me being like, how can I sponsor it? And that was my job at the time. That was my background. So it was very easy for me to like pull together some kind of like agreement or proposal and say like, here, you can sponsor this and whatnot. So that was kind of how it started. And it was very word of mouth. I sent an email out to everyone saying, this is what I'm doing. Tell your pregnant friends. And it was very word of mouth and based on the amazing experience these women had when they were engaging with Bump Club. And after I had my daughter, so I was working, keep in mind, I was pregnant, and I was hosting these 2 events a month. There was no social media, so it's not like I had to like keep up with social media. And I was like, okay, I'm going to have maternity leave. My daughter was like the best sleeper ever. I always say that if I would have started this when my second kid was born, there would have been no Bump Club because she did not sleep. But my daughter slept like pretty early on. And I would like check my email and do work. And I did a lot on maternity leave. Before I went back to work, because I was going to go back to work, I had gotten a new boss, and she was divorced and she didn't have kids, and she was not very nice to me. And she said to me, I heard about your side hustle, and if I hear anything that like you're doing it on my time, there's going to be consequences. And it was actually like, she could have gotten fired for that because I was still on maternity leave. That's illegal to say that to someone. But, you know, everyone in the office had other things. There were women who were, you know, selling makeup. There were people who were writing books. There were other things going on in the office, and this never inhibited my performance at Good Housekeeping. And so I said to my husband, I will go back as long as I can, but I don't think this is going to be easy. I think she's going to make this very difficult for me. And she did. And so I kind of was like, fuck that. Like, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm going to quit, and I'm going to do this full time. And what is the worst that happens? Like, that's my litmus test. What is the worst that happens? The worst that happens is it doesn't go anywhere, and I get a new job within the year. And like that is what it is. So I left, and I really just put my heart and soul into this. And, you know, within a year, I had an employee. I was operating in 3 different cities. And, you know, and a big part of it too was not just like, it wasn't just the lifestyle. It wasn't just like the entrepreneurship or whatnot. Like, I wanted to be around for my kid. Granted, I work a lot, and I just work very differently, and I control my hours. And so, you know, I was able to take her to classes. I was able to go to playgroups. Like, I'm really proud that I built that for myself, because you can't get those years back. And I'm glad I was around. And I had been traveling a lot at Bump Club, or a lot at Good Housekeeping. I eventually traveled a lot with Bump Club, but it was, again, on my time. Sometimes my family came. A lot of times it was one night. And so that was kind of how I made that decision. And, you know, I really never looked back. And so once it started taking off, it became a lot easier to continue to move forward, and just to know that like I needed to focus on this, and it was something.
Wow. That's an unbelievable story, guys. This is like,
thank you.
I mean, it's just so cool to hear how, you know, your shitty boss, right, basically gave you the opportunity to be an entrepreneur. Like, you did it on your own, but still, like, that kind of motivated
Yes.
you to do it. And not only were you solving a problem for other people, but you're solving a problem for yourself first, which I think is, a lot of people don't realize. A lot of entrepreneurs, they solve problems. Like, there's a big thing there's a saying that says, like, you are best fit to help, you know, yourself 5 years, 10 years in the past. So like, you were able to like help yourself and then help other pregnant women, which I think is absolutely amazing.
Here is the most amazing thing, is that I did not really look at this as a business at first. And I think that's why it was very successful. It was a community, and I put the community first. I put my mission first, and I never compromised on that. Like, it was always about that first, not making money. And I do see, and I see it with my clients. I see it now with my second business. Like, when you do that and you hold true to your values and your ideals and your mission and your North Star of your business, then that's when you actually eventually make money. Right. The best part about Bump Club was, to go back to your first question, the community. I built a community, and that was my business. My business wasn't a product. It was a community. And ultimately, that community drove revenue because advertisers wanted to get in front of them, and they wanted to reach them, and they wanted to be in their inboxes and on social media and whatnot. But that community, even to this day, even though Bump Club doesn't even exist anymore, people stop me all the time, and they're like, you are the Bump Club lady. And like, oh my God, I went to all your events. And it was a really incredible community in terms of diversity. It wasn't just Jewish, it was very diverse, and all moms were welcome. And I watched within the community, smaller communities form. And so like people tell me all the time, I met all my mom friends at Bump Club, or I had my play group. It was all people I met at my Bump Club dinner table, like when I was pregnant. To me, that is like that is better than any amount of money, that I had an impact on people's lives. And like some of their kids are friends to this day, and that's where they met. I mean, that is a legacy that, I'm sad that it doesn't exist anymore for that reason alone.
Mm-hmm. I think it's, it's actually amazing how you built this community with no social media. I believe you started this around like 2010, right? Yeah. That's kind of like peak. I think Instagram started like, I don't exactly know.
It was like 2012, year. But like, I think I didn't even join Instagram until like 2013, maybe.
Right. So I guess knowing, again, the few years that you had Bump Club with no social media to now, running a business that relies heavily on social media, I guess like, what are, the advantages and disadvantages of social media coming into play with running a business? So
before social media was a thing, I really implemented a lot of basic, simple marketing practices, which is the basis of everything I teach my clients to this day. So it's doing things like sending out emails. It's doing things. And at the time, also keep in mind, at the time when I first started, like there was no, like when I first started Bump Club, for example, there was no Eventbrite. Okay. So like people would have to like email me to RSVP and I would create a check-in list. Now, and pretty soon after there were easier ways to do that. But, technology across the board has made our lives a lot simpler. But, it was emails, it was surveys. I did a lot of surveys after my events because when people who were coming to my events knew that I cared and I made changes, they would tell other people like, oh, these events are so great that, it attributed to the word of mouth marketing. I did a lot of partnerships. I built my entire business before, and there was a little bit of Facebook at the time, but I built my entire business on partnerships. It was partnering with venues and it was partnering with experts who would be speakers and then brands who weren't necessarily paying me, but would share about it. It was partnering with people in the community and asking them and there were no influencers at the time, but influential people and saying, can you please spread the word to your friends? It was really looking at who else is talking to pregnant women that can also talk to them for me. And so those partnerships really pushed my business forward in a very big way as well. Like people would check out at, doesn't exist anymore, this maternity store called Preggers. When a woman gets pregnant and it's like week 13, 14 that like you really have to go get a new pair of pants because all of a sudden your pants don't fit and you have to go buy maternity jeans. And so people would go to Preggers when they were 13 weeks along and they would check out with their jeans and Emily behind the register would hand them a card and say, make sure you check out Bump Club. And so like it was a very, very guerrilla marketing way. And I relied a lot on those tactics. And then as social media came along, that is really what helped to have people in other communities hear about us. Although I will say before Instagram was a thing, we had already started in Minneapolis and Austin because word of mouth had traveled from people in Chicago. And so I think one is building a really solid product or experience that people will talk about, because if people talk about it, that's great. And now you have the social media piece to back it up and amplify it faster. Like if Instagram had been around when I first started Bump Club, I think we would have blown it out of the water far sooner than, 5-6 years. But It really wasn't until that 5-6 year mark when we were, working with Target, we were working with Nordstrom, but also we had the backing of social media. And so I always say to my clients, even to this day, social media is one piece. It is one piece of your marketing puzzle. You have to really, I call it sweep. You sweep that whole message through your social media, your website, emails, events, partnerships, and publicity. And that is really what gets the wheels turning and turning faster. So if you only put yourself in the social media basket, it's not the best place to only be there. You have to be doing these other things because you see transactions in other places, not just on social media. And actually, I see the most transactions through email. So like my social media is great. And I think it's a great place to remind people of things. but it's when I send emails out that I get people signed up for my mentorship group, and I get people, thinking about my podcast or signing up for an event or whatever it might be. So it really works hand in hand to answer your question.
Right. I think it's so cool to sit down with people that are entrepreneurs that are marketing minded. And, that whole spiel right there about, your sweet method, for example, I don't think, no offense to that, to operations or finance minded people, but I don't think when they're running a business, they're not really thinking about that. And, marketing, I believe, is the most essential skill you can have to run a business. And it's the most essential skill you need for your personal brand, right? Because you need to know how to promote yourself. You need to know how to have partnerships with people like you were mentioning. You need to know just who your customers are, et cetera. So marketing, I feel like, is the most essential tool that you need to have a good personal brand, and especially as an entrepreneur, right? Now you even have your own, you have your own marketing consulting company. So you know firsthand the importance of marketing, not only with your business, but with your client's business. So I want to ask you, as a marketing-minded person, right, what are some of the disadvantages that you face? We're always thinking about sales, end goal, product, all this stuff. But we often, I feel like I work in finance now, and I definitely have a different brain than most people that I work with. I often forget about the little things, the actual finances of it, the operations of it. So talk me through a little bit how you kind of built your businesses where you're doing the marketing, right? And maybe you have expertise in finance and operations in other areas.
No, I do
But
not.
talk to me how you kind of focus on the marketing aspect, and maybe you outsource the other part. I don't know. Tell me about that.
You have to outsource it. So early
Okay.
on with Bump Club, when you're first starting a business, you don't want to spend any money. And it's really hard to pay other people before you pay yourself. But that is really the first thing you have to do. Like, you have to figure out where your faults are and where you are not as strong. And you need to just hire people to do it. And it will allow you to do what you are best at faster and generate more money faster. So early on, I paid an employee before I paid myself. She ended up becoming my events director, and for years, she worked for me for 7 years. And she started as like an errand runner, like out of college. Like, I was pregnant. I had just had my baby. She like ran errands for me for our events, but she became a very integral part of Bump Club. And so she was my first hire. And then I realized that I needed also, like, I was keeping my finances in like a spreadsheet, and it was a mess. And so I hired a bookkeeper, and I hired eventually a CFO. I am not numbers, financial. That is not me at all. I hate it. And so I've always, from that moment on, it was probably like 3 years in, I have always hired someone to do that for me.
Sure.
I'm very involved in the process. I know how to look at the numbers. I know how to read the numbers, but I'm not the one who's like balancing things. That's not me. The other thing that I did was with this events director, she eventually ended up leaving, and I replaced her. I had a marketing person who helped me, but she really wanted to do the events. And so I put her in the events role because I am not a detail-oriented person. I'm an idea person, a strategic person. I do not want to be in the weeds, like executing an event. And I know that. And she made it so literally our corporate events were, I was like the bride. I just had to show up at the wedding. You know what I mean? It was like, I did not have to do anything. Like, Abby just made it so that everything ran, and I just had to show up 10 minutes before and be ready to do my thing and be on. I was the face of the company. So these are the lessons I learned at Bump Club. And then it made it a lot easier when I left, because I sold Bump Club, and I worked there for 2 years, and then I left for a lot of reasons. And if you want to ask about that, we can get into that after. But
Sure.
but I sold it and I left. And when I left and I started my own thing, the very first thing I did before I did anything was I hired a bookkeeper, and I had them get me all squared away. And I actually had my monthly meeting with her this morning. She's a godsend. So I hired a bookkeeper. I have 2 VAs now who help me with like things that I just don't like. It's not even that I can't do. It's just that I don't want to do. And now I'm starting to host bigger events again. I just announced a very large event that we're hosting here in Chicago in December. The very first thing I did before I did anything was I found an event planner. And so I have an event planner and an organizer who's doing all of the logistical stuff for me, because I don't want to do it. And I also hired a salesperson to sell sponsorships because I don't have time. Like I can do it, but I can't do everything. So it's really recognizing where you could use help and then also how you can afford it. So like, I think it's really, really cool in today's society that there are so many moms who left the working world and who want to come back and are brilliant and have experience, like high level experience, but you don't have to hire them for a full-time position because they don't want a full-time position. So you can hire them on a retainer or as an hourly consultant. Like I consult all the time. Like I have a bunch of projects that I consult on. And it's genius for everyone. Everyone wins. No one has to give me benefits, but I get paid a good amount of money. And I have experience. And I do have experience. I have 23 years of experience. So, I think that it's really trying to figure out where you need the help. And I think that goes for anyone who's starting a business.
So it's so important that we get into the knowing when you need help thing, because a lot of people, especially somebody like me, like I'm kind of hesitant to ask for help because
so am I. We all are.
Like I like to do things on my own, and sometimes I will literally spend hours trying to solve like one little whatever it is Excel problem, whatever, because I'm just so stubborn like that, and it's. I know it's a waste of time. Every time I do it, I know it's a waste of time. But I think it's so cool that you kind of know, right? Especially with Bum Club and now your consulting business, like you know what you're good at and you know what you're not good at. And knowing what you're not good at is so important because...
So important.
I mean, you could probably speak more to this, but just for me, right? Like I know my skills include like, I'm very good at schmoozing, right? Like I love to talk to people. I'm very good at, just marketing stuff and ideas. So that's kind of my skills. But then the operations and tech stuff, forget about it. How important is it to you to know, like, you're not good at something?
So I think it's incredibly important. But here's the thing. You don't find out that you're not good at it unless you try it. And so that is, I think, something really important. And I also think it's important to know how to do these things to the best of your ability or who to ask. Because if for some reason you hire someone and it doesn't work out or they leave or they get sick or whatever it might be, like you need to figure out like how to replace that person. So like, I'll give you for example, like when I first started my podcast, I know how to put my podcast on I know how to do it. It doesn't sound great when I do it. And that's why I hired a production company. And I have a great company that I use. They're meant for small businesses. We have a great thing going, a great rhythm, and they do all of my podcasts for the most part now. I don't have time to like cut and edit, and that's not my skill set to do that. That said, every now and then I'll want to drop a solo episode, even last minute, and I know how to put it out on the server. And so I think it's really important to know, but also to know not just what you're not good at, but what your value is. Because like my time is more valuable right now to a client than it is to like cutting a podcast episode that I can pay someone a fraction of the amount of money that I charge an hour to do that for me. So it's knowing those things too. And when you know what you're not good at or what you don't want to be doing, it allows you to focus on the things that you do want to be doing and that you are good at. And those are the things that are going to propel your business forward.
Right. Whether
you have a product or a service.
Right. I think too many people are trying to be a jack of all trades. I can do this, I can do that. But when it comes down to it, especially when we talk about, personal branding, which we haven't even gotten like to even a sliver of your personal brand. But when we talk about personal branding, everybody has their own unique kind of story and skills that they're good at. You can't be good at everything, right? There are very few people that are genuinely good at everything. And, somebody like you who's a business owner, even if you are good at everything, you simply don't have 24 hours in the day to do everything you want to do. So it's just like, it's so important to know this, like going forward, especially, even for me, right? Just hearing this as a young 22-year-old with a lot of aspirations, like it's just so reassuring and important to hear this. So I want to go more into the personal brand part of you, Lindsay. And I know we talk about your businesses, but, the one kind of like reoccurring theme that I feel like we've kind of talked about throughout this episode is the importance of connections. Before we were talking about Jewish communities. Jewish communities, that connection is invaluable. Talk about, you making connections with people at Sports Illustrated. We talk about you making connections with people in business. And connections are so important. But somebody like you, who's met thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people via the internet, like you have interacted with so many different people. You can't even put a number to it, right? So I want to ask you, for your brand, right? It's important to maintain relationships. You get nowhere without anybody else, right? Like I know this firsthand, whether it comes to like my podcast or just in work. I need to rely on other people for other things, right? Like you can't just solo mission things. So I want to ask you, how do you maintain relationships with these people over, several years? I mean, you've been in the industry for almost 25 years. How do you maintain relationships with these people to grow your brand?
I don't have a formula. I'm going to be very honest with you. Like if someone were to ask me describe yourself in one word, it is connector. And I actually have said that many times on my social media, not recently because my social media is kind of a disaster right now, but it's, and it's not really focused on my personal brand. But I would say I am a connector, and it's kind of just been ingrained in my head to when I talk to someone like you and I, when we got on here, I was like, oh, like immediately I thought of like 3 people that I could send your way. And that's just kind of who I am. And so it's not like a formula. It's not something I do on purpose. It's just, that's kind of how it is. And I think that like people who I'm very close with, like you don't have to talk to people every day to be close with them. And, it's really just maintaining that relationship over time. And I'll give you a couple of examples. Like I travel a lot for business. It would be very easy for me to, at the end of the day, go into my hotel room and order DoorDash or get room service. I always make it a point to schedule a dinner or a lunch or a coffee or all of the above. Like when I go to New York, for example, I have so many people. It's not even that I have to see, it's that I want to see. I cannot even see them all in one trip. It's not possible. And I go a lot, but I am back to back when I'm there because I want to maintain these relationships. And it's not even like that I have to. It's like I want to see these people. And so I think when you genuinely care about people and you want them in your lives, it's so important to make that extra effort, whether it's sending a text or sending an email or grabbing coffee when you're in town, or even saying to someone, I'm going to be in New York this week. I really don't have time because I'm tied up with work. I'd love to catch you next time. It's just like making that effort. And I think that goes a long way. And I also think that like I'm very like open and approachable to the point that like, I'll say next week that like I'm in New York, and I'll get a lot of messages that are like, oh my God, do you have any time? Let me know. And like, I wish I did, and I could see everyone. But I think it's also like maintaining that level of openness that people feel that they can reach out to you, because there have been times that I've been places and I've posted that I've been somewhere, or someone has heard that I'm somewhere, and I get a message. It's like, oh, would you like to grab coffee? And I do have time. And I'm like, yes, of course. I jump at every opportunity to meet and connect with people. Similar to like this situation, like you reached out to me. I said, sure. Like, I think it is so important to always be talking to people. And my virtual assistant is working with me on this right now, because she's like, you really have to start setting some more boundaries, because you need to gain some more of you need to get time back. And I do, but I just think that that's just who I am. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I don't, I don't know that you can teach someone that. I think if you're an introvert, it's a lot harder to do that. I mean, I have 2 kids. One is a huge introvert and one is a huge extrovert. And, the one that's an introvert knows, but like, she doesn't thrive on connection and whatnot. My other kid thrives on connection. And that's how I am. Like, I don't want to sit in a hotel room when I'm in a city by myself. Like, I don't want to do that. I want to be with other people. That's me as a person.
Right. So again, this is all just phenomenal, important advice here, guys. Like, you have to connect with people to get to where you want to be, right? Whether it could be in career, it could be, I don't know, something you have a passion for. It doesn't matter. Like, you have to be outbound, and you have to reach out to people. And there's some sort of element of trust that you have to have, right? I know you talk a lot about trust in your businesses, and building a community takes a lot of trust. So you have to have that trust that things will go well, and also these people like will help you. So I guess, like, Lindsay, to just sum everything up and wrap everything up, I want to ask you about this idea of trust, because I know it's a big part about about what you preach to not only your clients, but also, your podcast listeners, which, I would love to like go on. We could have an entire episode on just your podcast, or like, there's so much stuff that you're doing. It's like so hard to fit it in like an hour
I know.
window.
And it's also, I mean, it's not problematic, but that's why I'm hiring like so many, like I have assistants to help me because I can't, I know I can't do it all.
It is absolutely amazing. So final question for you. This idea of trust is essential to your brand. And I want to ask you, why do you have so much trust in other people? Because in this world, right, a lot of shit goes wrong. We could talk about literally everything that's going on across the globe right now. But why do you preach this idea of trust now that everything is just going to shit?
You get what you put out into the world. And I realized that, I mean, I've known that forever. I mean, with Bump Club, I talked a lot about being a mom. I really opened myself up. And the more I opened myself up, the more people opened themselves up to me and, magnetized back to my community. That's how I built my first community. With Dear Found Her and my second community, same thing. It's more, business related. It's female founders. It's, usually women 40 plus who really just are making a change. And, same thing. When you talk about things that are not ideal, when you talk about situations that aren't just roses and unicorns, because it's not, you're putting yourself out there and you're asking people to trust you and to listen to you. And they ultimately, give it back to you. And so I think that that's very important. But it really wasn't until October 7th when, I did start talking about being Jewish and how important it was to me to fight for the Jewish community. That was when I realized that the more you show yourself and the more you put yourself out into the world and the more you share your feelings, yes, you are going to lose people. I did 5,000, 6,000. I don't even know how many at this point. And I've lost friends because of it, but you will get that back. And so you have to kind of trust that process. Look, not everyone is a good person. And I think it's also really important to have that radar and to know, like, get a sense for people. I can usually tell within very quickly of meeting someone, like if they're in this for themselves or if they're, it's like that's an intuition that has come over time. And I don't trust those kind of people, and I choose who to trust with certain things. Like, there are things that I put out onto the world because I'm okay sharing them, but there are other things that I don't, that only my closest friends know. And so there's also these levels of trust. But I do think that you have to have some kind of just trust in the ability and confidence in people that, like, deep down people are not bad people. You can't go through life thinking everyone's out to get you. And I do think, to some degree you have to have your guard up, but I also think that it's okay to let it down. And especially to people who you want to have relationships with. I like some of my closest relationships that have come later in life really come from me and the other person letting their guard down.
Right. I think that's just like a phenomenal way to end things. And, especially trust with what the Jewish community is dealing with now. I think I have a lot of trust in the Jewish community. I have a lot of trust in Israel that things are going to be better. And if there's anything non-marketing related that you take away from this episode, it would be, have more trust in people, guys. Like it's hard, but you have to trust other people to get to where you want to be. So again, like we want to thank Lindsay. Like this has been a phenomenal episode. Lindsay, before I let you go, where can people find you on social media?
So you can find me on Instagram at Lindsay Pinchuk. I do a lot of like advocacy and it's like my personal stuff there. At Dear Found Her is where I talk a lot about entrepreneurship and marketing and all of my events for women and for founders and business owners. And then I have two websites, lindsaypinchuk.com and dearfoundher.com. And then I also started a passion project this year called The High Tea, which is every week I share 18 ways that you can support Jewish small business owners. It's a newsletter. It's linked in my Instagram account. And then I drop a podcast every week. It's called Dear Found Her, and it is a letter to women business owners. But anyone can listen. You don't have to be a woman. That's just who I market it towards. And I interview some of the biggest and best and most amazing female founders of our time. And you can find me there weekly.
Amazing, Lindsay. Well, make sure we go check out all of her websites, Instagram, I know it's a lot, guys, but like Lindsay's just been a phenomenal guest, and she's shared a lot of information that you're not going to hear from a lot of people. Lindsay is so giving to tell us about her story and about her brand and how she's built up this phenomenal brand. So make sure to pay it back a little bit by giving her a follow.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh,
this has been a great conversation.
Yes, this has been awesome. Also, make sure, another thing I want you guys to do is make sure to share this episode with somebody. I think there's somebody out there that, maybe doesn't know about marketing, maybe doesn't know about this idea of trust, or even this idea of a community. All of us belong to a community. Share this with somebody in your community. Why not? They need to hear this message also. So thanks for tuning in. Till next time, keep schmoozing.